When the spotlight faded and the applause finally stopped echoing through the grand hall, she thought she had reached the top of the world. The woman everyone called a genius, the queen of the piano, stood in the middle of the stage bowing for the last time that night. Her name was Elena Voss, and her fingers had danced across the piano keys like magic. Every note she played seemed to tell a story, and that night, the story was supposed to end with joy, but life doesn't always end the way we expect. As Elena left the concert hall, the cold rain fell against the windshield of her car. The city lights blurred into colors as she drove alone through the empty streets. Her manager had begged her to wait until morning, but Elena said she just wanted some quiet. Fame, money, and success. She had all of it, yet something inside her felt hollow. She often wondered what her music really meant if no one truly knew the person behind it. The rain grew heavier. A flash of light blinded her for a second. Tires screeched. And then, silence. When Elena opened her eyes again, everything was wrong. Her head throbbed and her vision was blurry. She was lying on a small, hard bed under a thin blanket. The ceiling above her wasn't white like a hospital's. It was cracked with paint peeling off in long strips. The air smelled of detergent and something sour. Confused, she sat up. Her clothes were unfamiliar. A faded gray uniform with a name tag that read Lena. She looked around the tiny room. A broken mirror, a metal bucket, and a small table with cleaning tools. It was nothing like her luxurious apartment in Paris. Panic filled her chest. "Where am I?" she whispered, but her voice sounded strange, softer, higher. She touched her face and froze. This wasn't her face. The reflection in the mirror showed a young woman, thin and tired-looking, with dull brown hair and hollow eyes. Elena stumbled backward, heart racing. Her mind screamed for logic, for reason, but none came. The door burst open and a tall woman in a strict uniform entered. "Lena, you're awake?" "Finally," she snapped. "Get up. Breakfast won't serve itself. You're already late again." Elena tried to speak, to explain, but the woman didn't wait. She tossed a cleaning rag at her and left, slamming the door. Elena sat there, shaking. The name Lena echoed in her head. Somehow, impossibly, she was in someone else's body. The next hour was a blur of confusion. She was ordered around by people who seemed to know her, other maids, kitchen workers, and a strict head housekeeper who barked commands like a soldier. They worked inside a grand mansion, the kind Elena had only seen in magazines. Marble floors, shining chandeliers, and paintings worth millions decorated the halls. But to everyone there, she wasn't a guest, she was invisible. "Faster, Lena," one of the maids whispered harshly as she scrubbed the stairs. "You don't want the boss to see you slacking again. He'll fire you this time." "The boss?" Elena asked quietly. The maid gave her a confused look. "You mean you forgot?" "Adrian Silverman, the CEO. He owns this mansion, the company, probably half the city. Don't talk to him. Don't look at him. Just do your job." Elena nodded slowly, pretending to understand. Hours passed. Her hands hurt from cleaning, her knees ached, and her stomach growled. It was hard to believe that just yesterday, if it really was yesterday, those same hands had played Chopin before a cheering crowd. Now they were scrubbing floors covered in soap and dust. When she finally found a quiet moment in the kitchen, she tried to gather her thoughts. She remembered the car accident, the light, the sound, the sudden crash, and then waking up here. Maybe it was a dream or a punishment or something beyond explanation. Whatever it was, she was trapped in it. Days turned into weeks. Elena, now Lena, learned the hard way that this body's life was full of hardship. The real Lena, whoever she had been, must have suffered in silence. She was the lowest among the staff, always blamed for mistakes, mocked for being slow, and punished for things she didn't even do. The other maids whispered cruel jokes behind her back. "Careful, Lena. Don't break another plate, or maybe you'll end up on the streets again." She's so useless. No wonder no one wants her around. Elena wanted to shout, to defend herself, but she couldn't risk it.
She had nowhere to go, no identity of her own.
So she swallowed the words and stayed quiet, working until her hands were raw. Still, even in that pain, something inside her remained unbroken. Every night, after everyone had gone to sleep, she walked quietly through the mansion. It was huge and cold, but the silence felt like an old friend. One night, as she passed through the great hall, she stopped. There, in the corner, covered with a white cloth, was a piano. A beautiful black grand piano. its golden brand name glimmering faintly in the moonlight. Her breath caught. Without thinking, she stepped closer and gently lifted the cover. The keys shone softly under the dim light. Her fingers trembled as she touched them. The cold, smooth surface felt familiar, too familiar. She pressed one key. A soft note rang out, pure and clear. It was like hearing her own voice again after being silent for too long. Her heart raced. She pressed another key, then another. Slowly, the notes formed a melody. Her body moved instinctively, the same way it used to when she was Elena Voss. Her fingers glided, not remembering, but knowing. The empty hall filled with sound. For the first time since she'd woken up in this strange body, she felt alive. Every note carried the weight of her emotions, her confusion, her pain, her longing for who she used to be. The music wrapped around her like warmth in the cold night. But her peace didn't last. "Who's there?" The voice came from behind her. She froze, her hands hovering over the keys. It was a man's voice, deep, calm, but commanding. Slowly, she turned her head. At the top of the staircase stood a man in a dark suit holding a glass of water. His eyes were sharp and unreadable. Even in the dim light, his presence was powerful. It was Adrian Silverman, the mansion's owner. He looked at her for a long moment, then at the piano. "You're the maid, aren't you?" he said. "The one who can't even serve tea without spilling it." Elena's lips parted, but no words came. "Do you know how much that piano costs?" He continued, stepping closer. "It's not for servants to touch. If you scratch it, you'll pay for it with your job." "I'm sorry," she whispered. Her heart pounded as she backed away. Adrian's gaze lingered on her, almost curious. He seemed ready to scold her further, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the faint tremble in her voice. Or maybe he had heard enough of her playing before speaking to know there was something different about her. Still, he turned away without another word. "Clean up and go to bed," he said coldly, walking off. When he disappeared from view, Elena finally let out the breath she was holding. She covered the piano again, but her hands were still shaking. She had been seen, but also heard, and that gave her a strange kind of hope. That night, lying on her small bed, she couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. Maybe this was why she had been given this second life, to start over, to find meaning again, not as a star, but as a soul rediscovering itself. Her life had changed completely. She was no longer Elena Voss, the top pianist admired by the world. She was Lena, the bullied maid, invisible to everyone except perhaps the man who had heard her music. And though she didn't know it yet, that single night, the sound of her piano in the silence, had already started a chain of events that would change everything for both of them. The next morning came too soon. The alarm clock rang before the first light of dawn, and Lena, still trying to understand this strange new life, forced herself to get up. The wooden floor was cold under her bare feet as she tied the apron around her waist. Her arms ached from yesterday's chores, but she didn't complain. She had learned that in this mansion, complaints were wasted breath. The house was already alive with the quiet rush of servants starting their day. The kitchen clattered with pots and pans, the smell of fresh bread mixed with strong coffee, and footsteps echoed in the marble halls. "Lena, don't just stand there," barked the head housekeeper, a tall woman with a sharp tongue. "You're on breakfast duty. Make sure the silverware shines this time. Last week you embarrassed us." "Yes, ma'am," Lena replied softly. Her hands moved automatically now, polishing, cleaning, setting the long dining table that could seat 20 guests. But inside she was lost in thought. Her mind wandered back to the piano, to the music she'd played in the quiet night. She could still remember the look on the CEO's face when he saw her. He had been angry at first, but there was something else behind his eyes too. Something that looked like curiosity. It had stayed in her mind all night. After breakfast was served, the maid stood silently along the wall waiting. The family began to eat. The CEO sat at the head of the table reading the morning paper, hardly speaking. Across from him sat his younger sister, a graceful woman with sharp features and a tone that could slice glass. "I heard you were up late again, brother," she said, sipping her coffee. "Didn't I tell you to sleep more?" "I couldn't," he replied simply, turning a page. There was music. Music? She frowned. From where? He didn't answer. He just looked toward the hall where the piano stood hidden under its cover. Lena, standing nearby with a tray in her hands, lowered her gaze quickly. She didn't want him to notice her. Her heart was racing. What if he told them what happened? What if they punished her for touching the piano again? But he said nothing more. When breakfast ended, the guests left and the staff returned to their work. That was when the whispers began. Did you hear? The boss was talking about music this morning. Maybe he's finally going to fire that Lena girl for sneaking around last night. She should have known better. Who touches the master's piano? That thing cost more than her whole life. Lena heard every word, but she kept her head down and scrubbed the floor. By noon, her back hurt, her hands were sore, and her stomach growled. Still, she worked without rest. In her past life, she had played concerts for hours without tiring. Now she was fighting to survive each day in silence. But even through the exhaustion, she began to notice small things. The way the old butler always walked slower when near her, as if watching quietly. The gardener who gave her an extra apple at lunch. The little moments of kindness hidden among the cruelty. They were tiny, but to her they meant the world. Days passed, and the mansion buzzed with preparation for a grand event. A charity gala, one of the biggest of the year, was being hosted by the Silverman family. Guests from all over the city would attend. Businessmen, artists, reporters, and even politicians. The servants worked double shifts, polishing floors, arranging flowers, and decorating every corner. Lena was assigned to help in the grand hall. It was where the piano stood. She couldn't help glancing at it every time she walked by. It was covered again, silent, almost sad. She wanted to play just once more, but she couldn't risk it. Not after that night. The day of the event arrived. The mansion glowed like a palace. Expensive cars lined the driveway and laughter echoed from the front doors. The guests entered in glittering gowns and tailored suits holding glasses of champagne. The maids stood quietly by the walls, invisible as always. Lena moved carefully, serving drinks and clearing trays, her eyes low. She tried to stay calm, but her heart raced whenever she saw the CEO nearby. He moved among the guests with quiet confidence, greeting them politely but never smiling much. Then something unexpected happened. A guest, a famous pianist known for his arrogance, was invited to perform that evening. He arrived late, wearing a long coat and a smirk that told everyone he thought he was above them all. As he passed by, he glanced at the staff and muttered loud enough for all to hear, "I see you even have maids pretending to understand music here." A few guests chuckled politely. Lena froze. She wanted to shrink away, but his words burned in her ears. Later, as he sat at the piano, he played fast and loud, trying to impress the crowd. His fingers moved quickly, but his music had no soul. Lena could hear it, every note felt empty. She had spent her whole life believing music was more than skill. It was feeling, and there was none in his playing. When he finished, the guests clapped, some out of habit, some out of respect. He stood up proudly, bowing. "Of course," he said loudly. "No one here could possibly do better." The CEO, who had been watching from the side, spoke up calmly. "I'm not so sure." The pianist raised an eyebrow. "Oh? You think someone else here could outplay me?" A small smile touched the CEO's lips. "Perhaps. One of my maids." The room fell silent. The guests turned in shock. A few laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. The pianist looked amused. "Your maid? You can't be serious." "Very," the CEO replied. His eyes moved toward Lena, standing near the wall, her heart pounding in her chest. "You step forward." The tray in her hands trembled. She looked around, hoping he meant someone else, but his gaze didn't move. Slowly, she set the tray down and walked forward. The guests began whispering. Some laughed. "This is ridiculous," one woman muttered. A maid at the piano? Lena's legs felt weak. She wanted to run away, but something deep inside her, something that had lived through applause, pressure, and perfection, told her to stay. When she reached the piano, she hesitated. The cover had been removed. The keys shone under the golden lights, waiting. Her hands hovered above them, shaking slightly. "Go ahead," said the CEO quietly. The pianist crossed his arms, smirking. "Let's see the miracle maid, then." Lena took a deep breath. For a moment, the noise around her faded. The crowd disappeared. The lights dimmed. In her mind, she was back on stage, not as Lena the maid, but as Elena, the woman who once lived for music. She pressed the first note. The sound was soft, almost trembling. Then another note followed and another. Slowly, the melody began to build. Her fingers found their rhythm, flowing with emotion and grace. The air changed. The laughter stopped. Every note carried something real, pain, longing, and hope. The guests who had mocked her moments ago now stood silent, their expressions softening. The pianist's smile faded. The CEO stood still, watching her. He had seen many performers before, but none like this. He could feel something in her music, a story, a memory. It was the same melody he had heard that night when he caught her playing alone. When she finished, there was no sound for a moment. Then someone began to clap. Slowly, the applause grew louder, filling the hall. Some guests even had tears in their eyes. The arrogant pianist looked stunned. He muttered something under his breath and left the stage quickly, humiliated. Lena stood there, her heart racing. She didn't know what to do. The CEO walked up to her, his eyes calm but full of questions. "Who taught you to play like that?" he asked quietly. She looked down, unsure of what to say. "No one," she whispered. "It's just something I remember." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Clean yourself up. You don't belong in the shadows anymore." Lena didn't know what he meant, but his tone wasn't harsh. It was thoughtful, almost gentle. For the first time since she had arrived in this world, someone had seen her not as a servant, but as a person. That night, when she returned to her small room, she sat on her bed and cried quietly. Not because she was sad, but because for the first time in weeks she felt alive again. She didn't know it yet, but this night would change her life forever. The maid they had all mocked had just played her way into the hearts of everyone there, especially the man who would soon discover the truth behind her music. That night changed everything inside the mansion. The sound of Lena's music still lingered in every corner of the great hall. The guests talked about it even as they left, amazed by what they had witnessed. The story of a maid who played like a master spread fast through the city's elite circles. But for Lena, the night ended quietly. When the guests were gone, she returned to her small room, her hands still trembling from the performance. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her fingers as if they belonged to someone else. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She had played again, really played, for the first time since she woke up in this strange life. For a few minutes, she forgot who she had become. The music had brought her back to herself. But she also knew that this moment would draw attention, and attention could be dangerous. The next morning, the air in the mansion felt different. The maids who once ignored her now stared at her with a mix of surprise and jealousy. Some whispered behind her back, "I can't believe she played like that. It was probably luck. Maybe she's been pretending all along." Lena tried not to listen. She went on with her work, keeping her head low, but she could feel the change. People who never noticed her before were now watching. Later that day, she was called to the study. The butler told her the CEO wanted to see her. Her heart began to race. She followed the long corridor, her mind filled with questions. Inside the study, the CEO sat by the window reading a file. When he looked up, his expression was calm but serious. "Sit," he said. Lena sat on the edge of the chair, her hands folded in her lap. He studied her for a moment before speaking. "You surprised me last night." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "It wasn't trouble," he said quietly. "You played beautifully. People are still talking about it." Lena didn't know how to respond. She kept her eyes down. He leaned back in his chair. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She hesitated. She couldn't tell him the truth, that she was once a famous pianist who had somehow awakened in another woman's body. "No one would believe it. I don't remember," she said softly. "It just comes to me." The CEO's brow furrowed slightly as if trying to understand. "Music doesn't just come to people like that," he said. "There's something about your playing. It reminded me of someone." Lena's heart skipped. "Someone?" he nodded. "A pianist I once admired. She passed away some time ago. Your music felt like hers. It had the same soul." She froze, unable to speak. Hearing her old name mentioned, even indirectly, sent a chill through her. He closed the file on his desk. "From now on, you'll help with the household's music events. You won't do cleaning anymore." Her eyes widened. "But sir, I'm just—" "Don't argue," he said firmly. "You have a gift. I won't waste it." She nodded quietly, still processing what she'd just heard. When she left the study, the other maids stared at her in shock. Word spread quickly. She's not doing cleaning anymore, one of them whispered. The boss promoted her. Promoted? She's just a maid who plays the piano. How long will that last? Another replied bitterly. Lena ignored them and went about her new duties. She was assigned to the music room, a bright, elegant space filled with instruments and shelves of old music sheets. She was told to keep the room organized and to practice whenever there was free time. For the first time in weeks, she felt a bit of peace. The piano became her refuge again. Whenever she touched the keys, she forgot her fears and doubts. One afternoon, as she played softly, the CEO entered the room. She stopped immediately and stood up. Continue, he said. I didn't mean to interrupt. She hesitated, then sat again. He walked slowly around the room, listening quietly as she played. When the song ended, he said, You play with emotion, not just skill. That's rare. Music should come from the heart, she said before she could stop herself. He smiled faintly. That's exactly what that other pianist once said. Lena's breath caught, but she said nothing. Over the next few days, he began to spend more time in the music room. Sometimes he listened in silence. Other times he asked her to play specific pieces. He seemed calmer when she played, as if her music eased something heavy inside him. But not everyone was happy with the change. The CEO's sister, who managed the household social affairs, noticed the growing attention around the maid. She disliked it. You're letting a servant play for our guests? She said sharply one evening. People are talking. Let them talk, her brother replied simply. She has talent. She's still a maid, the sister insisted. You can't let her cross boundaries. It doesn't look good. He didn't argue, but his silence told her she wouldn't change his mind. That night, the sister called 2 senior maids into her office. Keep an eye on that girl, she ordered. If she slips, I want to know. And from then on, Lena felt it. The cold looks, the subtle hostility, the whispers that followed her everywhere. Some of the staff began to make her work harder again. Trying to remind her of her place one day, someone accidentally spilled water near the piano just before she was supposed to play for the CEO's business guests. The keys were wet and she panicked, afraid the instrument might be damaged. While she was drying it carefully, one of the maids smirked. You think you're special now, don't you? Just because you can play a few songs? I don't think that, Lena said softly. I'm just doing what I'm told. The maid scoffed and walked away. But even with all the pressure, Lena didn't stop. The more they tried to push her down, the stronger her spirit became. Each time she played, she poured her heart into it, as if her music could protect her. Days turned into weeks again, and her bond with the CEO slowly deepened, not through words, but through silence and music. He was a man of few emotions, but when she played, he seemed different, more human, more vulnerable. One evening, as she finished a piece, he said quietly, Do you know why I keep asking you to play? She looked at him uncertainly. Because your music reminds me that there's still beauty in the world, he said. I lost that feeling a long time ago. Something about his voice made her heart ache. She could tell he carried loneliness behind his calm face. Maybe he had lost someone too. After that, he began trusting her more. He let her organize a small concert for the company's charity foundation. It was a huge opportunity, but also a risk. She had never played publicly in this new life. The day of the concert, she was nervous. She stood behind the curtain, hands trembling, listening to the murmurs of the crowd. She wasn't just a maid anymore, but she wasn't sure who she was either. When she stepped onto the stage, she took a deep breath. The lights were bright, the audience silent. Then, as her fingers touched the piano, the world disappeared again. Her music told her story, the story of loss, confusion, and rebirth. Every note carried emotion that no words could express. By the time she finished, people were standing, applauding with tears in their eyes. The CEO watched from the side, a faint smile on his face. He knew now that this wasn't ordinary talent. It was something deeper, something almost familiar. After the show, he approached her backstage. You were incredible, he said quietly. But I need to know, who are you really? Her heart pounded. She didn't know how to answer. The truth was too strange to explain. I'm just someone who found music again, she said finally. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then keep playing. The world needs to hear it. When he walked away, she felt both relief and fear. She knew he was starting to suspect something. And deep down she was afraid that the truth, if ever revealed, might destroy the fragile peace she had found. That night she sat by her window looking at the moonlight. Her reflection in the glass still showed Lena's face, but inside, she was Elena, the pianist who had once lost everything and was now rediscovering life through kindness, hardship, and music. She didn't know what the future would bring, but one thing was certain: her story was far from over. The night after the charity concert felt unreal. Lena sat alone in her small room, still wearing the simple dress they had given her for the event. The applause from earlier echoed in her mind like a dream she didn't want to end. For the first time since waking up in this strange body, she felt a small piece of her old self return, the part that lived and breathed through music. But along with joy came confusion. The CEO's words kept replaying in her mind. "Who are you really?" he had asked. It wasn't just curiosity. There was a tone in his voice that made her believe he truly sensed something unusual about her. She touched her chest lightly and whispered, "If only I could tell you who I really am." The next morning, the mansion buzzed with excitement. The newspapers had already printed stories about the mystery pianist maid who stunned the city's elite. The article described her performance as haunting and emotional, calling her an undiscovered star. When Lena walked into the kitchen, the other maids were reading the paper and whispering. The moment they saw her, they went silent. Some stared with envy, others with suspicion. "So it's true," one finally said. "You really think you're someone special now, don't you?" Lena didn't answer. She knew that anything she said would only make things worse. Another maid snorted. "The boss may be impressed, but don't forget, you're still a servant here. Don't start acting like one of them." Lena quietly picked up a tray and left the room. She didn't want to argue. She had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the strongest answer. Later that afternoon, she was called to the music room again. The CEO stood by the window looking out at the garden. When she entered, he turned around. "You've become quite famous overnight," he said. "The press won't stop asking who you are." "I didn't mean to attract attention," she said softly. "I just played." He smiled faintly. "That's what real artists do. They don't chase fame. It follows them." She looked down, unsure what to say. He walked closer. "I've arranged for you to receive proper lessons and time to practice. From now on, you'll be our music director for company events. You'll also perform at our upcoming charity concert next month." Lena froze. "Perform again? In public?" "Yes," he said simply. "You have a gift. The world should hear it." Her heart raced. She wanted to refuse. She was still terrified that someone might recognize her, that her past would somehow come crashing into this new life. But there was no escaping fate. "I'll try my best," she said finally. "Good," he replied. "That's all I ask." He paused before leaving the room. "You remind me more and more of that pianist I once admired," he added quietly. "The way you play, the emotion in every note. It's as if she's alive again through you." Lena stood still, her breath catching in her throat. She wanted to ask him more, but he was already gone. Over the next few weeks, Lena practiced tirelessly. The CEO arranged for a music coach to visit the mansion, though the coach quickly realized Lena didn't need much teaching. Her skill was far beyond anything they expected. But behind her progress, jealousy was growing like a shadow. The CEO's sister, who had always managed the family's reputation, was furious. "This maid is becoming a distraction," she said during a private dinner. "People are talking about her more than about our company. It's embarrassing." "She's doing good work," her brother said calmly. "She's a servant," the sister snapped, "and servants belong in the background, not on stage." He didn't respond, only looked at her silently, which made her angrier. She decided that night that she would put an end to Lena's rise. The next morning, she called 2 senior maids and whispered something to them. "You know what to do," she said coldly. That afternoon, while Lena was practicing, the same 2 maids entered the music room pretending to clean. One of them leaned close to her and said in a low voice, "Don't get too comfortable, you'll fall soon, everyone does." Lena ignored them, her hands steady on the piano keys. She had learned to stay calm no matter what they said. But a few days later, the real trouble began. During a company meeting, a rumor started spreading that Lena had stolen an expensive watch from one of the guests during the previous event. The accusation came from one of the senior maids, who claimed she had seen Lena near the guest's coat room. When the story reached the CEO's sister, she wasted no time. "I told you she was trouble," she said. "She's already stealing from the guests." The CEO listened quietly but didn't react. "Do you have proof?" "She was seen near the room," the sister said firmly. "That's not proof," he replied. But the situation escalated quickly. The missing watch was found later that day in Lena's small drawer. She was called to the study, her heart pounding as she entered. The CEO sat at his desk, the watch lying in front of him. "Do you want to explain this?" he asked quietly. Lena stared at the watch, her hands trembling. "That's not mine," she said. "I didn't take it." "Then how did it end up here?" "I don't know. I swear I didn't steal anything." For a long moment he said nothing. His expression was unreadable. Finally, he stood up and walked toward the window. "I don't believe you would steal," he said slowly. "But I also can't ignore this." Her eyes filled with tears. "Please, sir, I'm telling the truth." He turned around, meeting her gaze. "I'll investigate this myself," he said. "Until then, you're suspended from all performances." It felt like the ground disappeared beneath her. She nodded silently and left the room, holding back her tears until she was alone. In her small room, she sat on the bed, staring at the floor. She had worked so hard, endured so much, and now it was all falling apart because of a lie. That night, she didn't sleep. She kept replaying everything in her mind, trying to understand who had done this and why. Then she remembered the two maids and the cold look in the sister's eyes. It all made sense now. The next morning, as she walked through the hall with her few belongings packed, she heard footsteps behind her. When she turned, she saw the CEO. "Where are you going?" he asked. "They said I should leave until things are cleared," she said quietly. "I don't want to cause more trouble." He looked at her for a long moment. "You shouldn't run from lies," he said. "I've been reviewing the security cameras. You were telling the truth." Her eyes widened. "You saw?" He nodded. "Someone planted the watch in your drawer. I saw who it was." Lena's heart pounded. "Who?" He didn't answer directly. "It's being handled. You'll return to the music room tomorrow." She wanted to thank him, but the words wouldn't come out. All she could do was bow her head in gratitude. When she returned to her room that night, she finally allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness this time, but from relief. For the first time, someone believed her. The next day, the mansion felt different. The two maids who had framed her were gone, dismissed quietly. The CEO's sister avoided her eyes during breakfast, pretending nothing had happened. Later, when she sat at the piano again, the CEO came in and said, "I'm sorry you had to go through that." "You don't need to apologize," she said softly. "It's not your fault." "It is," he replied. "I should have trusted my instincts sooner." There was a long silence between them. Then he said something that surprised her. "Music reveals the truth," he said. "That's why I never doubted you. Someone who plays like you could never lie." Her eyes met his, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them, something gentle and real. From that day forward, he treated her not just as a maid or musician, but as someone he respected deeply. He began sharing more about himself, his childhood, his dreams, and even his regrets. He told her how, years ago, he had loved music, but gave it up to run his family's business after his father passed away. "When I heard you play," he said quietly one evening, "I remembered who I used to be." Lena smiled faintly. Maybe music brought both of us back. He looked at her thoughtfully, and though neither said it aloud, they both felt it. Their lives had started to intertwine in ways neither expected. But while their bond grew stronger, so did the curiosity of the world outside. The mystery pianist maid had become a sensation, and the truth about her identity was closer to being discovered than either of them realized. And when that truth finally came to light, it would change everything. The next few weeks passed like a calm after a storm. Lena was finally back to playing in the music room, and though she still wore the same maid uniform, her role in the mansion felt entirely different now. People no longer looked at her as a servant. They looked at her with quiet respect, or at least curiosity. The CEO often visited while she practiced. He would stand near the window listening without interrupting, his expression soft but thoughtful. Sometimes he would close his eyes and just let the music fill the silence. One afternoon, after she finished a slow, sorrowful piece, he said quietly, "When you play, it feels like you're speaking from another world." Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe music is a world of its own," she said. "One where everyone can understand each other without words." He nodded. "That's probably why I can never stop listening to you." For a second, she felt her heartbeat quicken. There was a warmth in his eyes she hadn't seen before, something deeper than admiration. She quickly looked away, not trusting herself to speak. Over time, the household changed its tone toward her. The other maids were careful now, even polite, though not friendly. The gossip had died down after the truth came out about the stolen watch, and no one dared to speak against her anymore. But Lena could still feel the quiet distance between her and them. She didn't mind. She had learned to find peace in solitude. One morning, she was called to the CEO's office. When she entered, he was sitting behind his desk with a newspaper in hand. "There's something I need to show you," he said, sliding the paper toward her. On the front page was her picture, the one from the charity event weeks ago. The headline read, "Mysterious Maid Pianist to Perform Again at National Charity Gala." Lena's breath caught. I didn't agree to this," he nodded. "I know, but the organizers insisted. You've become the highlight of the event. They even called the mansion directly." "I don't think I can face that many people again," she said softly. "I'm not who they think I am." He leaned forward. "Who are you then?" Her fingers tightened around the paper. The question pierced deeper than he could know. She looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "I wish I could tell you," she whispered, "but even I don't fully understand it." He watched her in silence for a moment. "Whatever your past is, it doesn't change what you are now," he said finally. "And right now you're an artist who can touch hearts. That's what matters." Lena didn't reply, but deep inside she knew he was right. Still, the fear of being discovered lingered in her mind like a shadow she couldn't shake off. When the day of the National Charity Gala arrived, the mansion was in a rush. The event was to be held at the city's grand concert hall, a place Lena knew all too well. She had performed there many times before, back when she lived as the celebrated pianist whose name everyone once knew. As the car approached the hall, she stared out the window, her heart racing. Everything looked the same, the lights, the banners, the elegant crowd waiting outside. For a moment it felt as if she had stepped back into her old life, only now she was living it through someone else's eyes. The CEO noticed her silence. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "Maybe a little," she said quietly. "This place brings back memories." He smiled. "Good memories, I hope." She forced a small smile in return. "Some of them." Inside the hall, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. People whispered and turned as Lena entered, still dressed modestly but carrying herself with quiet grace. Many recognized her from the last performance, but no one knew her story, and that mystery made her even more fascinating. As she sat at the piano on stage, she closed her eyes. For a moment, she felt the weight of both lives, the one she had lost and the one she was now living. Then as her fingers touched the keys, everything else disappeared. The first notes rang out clear and gentle, like drops of rain falling into silence. The melody grew soft and deep, carrying emotions that words could never express. Loneliness, hope, loss, love, and forgiveness. The audience sat still, not daring to move. Even the air felt different, charged with something pure and alive. When the final chord faded, there was silence for a heartbeat, and then the hall erupted in applause. People stood, clapping and cheering, some with tears in their eyes. The CEO watched her from the side of the stage, his expression unreadable. But when she turned toward him, she saw something in his gaze that made her chest tighten, pride, admiration, and something more. After the performance, reporters crowded around, trying to learn more about the mysterious pianist. But the CEO's security team quickly escorted her out the back entrance. In the quiet of the car, Lena finally breathed again. "You were incredible," he said softly. "Thank you." she whispered. I just played from the heart, he smiled. That's exactly why no one can forget you. Back at the mansion, things began to shift subtly between them. He invited her to dinners more often, asked her opinions on music for company events, and even shared stories about his late parents. The walls between them slowly began to fade. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, he found her in the music room again. She was sitting at the piano, her fingers moving slowly across the keys, playing a tune so soft it sounded like a lullaby. He stood by the doorway, watching quietly. That song, he said finally, I've heard it before. It's the same one my mother used to play when I was a boy. Lena looked up, surprised. Your mother? He nodded. Yes, she said it was written by her favorite pianist, a woman who disappeared years ago after a terrible accident. Her breath caught. She knew that story too well. It was her story. The accident that took her memory, that led her here into this strange new life. She stared at him, her heart pounding. Do you remember her name? She asked quietly. He hesitated, then said, Elena. The name hit her like a wave. It was hers, the name she had once performed under. The name that was now only a whisper from the past. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at him. What if I told you, she said softly, that sometimes people don't really disappear, they just start over? He frowned slightly, unsure what she meant. Are you saying you knew her? Lena smiled faintly, tears shining in her eyes. Maybe I did. Maybe I still do. There was a long pause filled with things neither of them could say. Finally, he stepped closer. Whoever you are, he said gently, you've brought something back that I thought I'd lost forever. She swallowed hard, her heart aching with emotion she couldn't describe. And what's that? Hope, he said simply, her eyes filled with tears. She looked down, afraid that if she spoke, the truth would spill out before she was ready. The next morning, the CEO's sister returned from a business trip and noticed the growing closeness between them. It didn't take her long to realize that something had changed, and she didn't like it. She's manipulating you, she said coldly during a meeting. Don't forget who she is, a servant. You're letting her make a fool of you. He looked at her calmly. No one makes a fool of me. She's different. Different? The sister scoffed. She's playing you. She knows how to use that piano to make people believe anything. He stood up, his voice firm. That's enough, she glared at him. You're risking your reputation for her. For a maid. He turned away, refusing to argue further. But her words lingered like poison in the air. That night, Lena overheard their conversation. She didn't mean to listen, it just happened while she was passing by the study. Hearing the sister's words made her heart ache. She didn't want to cause trouble or divide the family. When she returned to her room, she sat by the window for a long time, watching the moonlight spill across the floor. Maybe it was time to go. Maybe her presence here was only making things harder. But as she packed her few belongings, she heard a soft knock at the door. When she opened it, the CEO stood there. Are you leaving? He asked quietly. She froze. I don't want to be the reason your family fights. He shook his head. You're not the problem. They just don't understand yet. Lena looked down, her voice trembling. I don't belong here. He stepped closer. You belong where your heart takes you. And right now it's here. For a moment they stood in silence, both caught between truth and feeling. Then he said softly, If you walk away now, the world will never hear the music that only you can create. Her eyes met his, and she saw sincerity in every word. She slowly set her bag down. Then I'll stay, she whispered. He smiled faintly. Good, because I can't imagine this place without you. That night, Lena lay awake thinking of everything that had happened. The pain, the lies, the music, and the strange connection she now shared with him. She didn't know where fate would take her next. But one thing was certain. Her secret could no longer stay hidden forever. And when it finally came out, the truth would change both of their lives in ways they never expected. The days following that night felt strange for Lena. The house was peaceful, yet something inside her was restless. Every morning she sat by the piano, playing soft melodies that carried both joy and sadness. It was as if the music knew something her heart hadn't yet accepted. The CEO continued to visit her often. They spoke about life, about dreams, and sometimes about loss. There was a quiet connection between them, something neither dared to name. But no matter how close they grew, Lena always felt that invisible line, the secret she still carried deep inside. One afternoon, he came into the music room holding a letter. "We've received an invitation," he said. "They want you to perform at the International Music Gala next month." Lena froze. That gala wasn't just any event. It was the same competition she had once won years ago, before her accident, before everything changed. "I don't think I can do that," she said softly. "Why not?" he asked. "It's the highest honor a pianist can receive." She hesitated. "Some memories are better left where they belong." He looked at her gently. "Lena, I don't know what you've been through, but running from the past won't heal it. You have a gift that the world deserves to see. Don't hide from it." His words stayed with her long after he left. That night she sat in front of the mirror, touching her reflection lightly as if trying to see through it. The face staring back wasn't the one she had been born with. It was different, softer, humbler, yet her eyes still carried the same soul. She whispered to herself, "Maybe it's time they knew who I really am." The following week passed quickly. The entire mansion helped prepare for the event. Even the other maids treated her with respect now, offering quiet smiles instead of whispers. The CEO oversaw every detail personally, from the piano tuning to her travel arrangements. But as the day drew closer, Lena's heart grew heavier. Every sound, every step, brought back flashes of her old life. The bright lights, the applause, the endless pressure to be perfect. And then, the accident. She remembered it so clearly now. The storm that night, the car spinning off the road, the shattering glass, and then darkness. When she awoke in this body, she thought fate was punishing her, but now she began to see it differently. Maybe it was giving her another chance, not as the famous pianist everyone adored, but as the woman who finally learned to play for love, not recognition. The night of the gala arrived. The concert hall was filled with guests from around the world, musicians, critics, and wealthy patrons. The CEO accompanied her, standing beside her as the crowd whispered her name. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "I think I've been waiting for this moment all my life." When she walked on stage, the audience went silent. The lights shone brightly, and the piano gleamed under them like a piece of the moon. She sat down slowly, her heart beating fast. For a moment she couldn't move. The memory of her old self flashed before her eyes. The same stage, the same piano, and the same crowd. Only this time she wasn't playing to prove herself. She was playing to be free. Her fingers touched the keys and the music began, soft at first, then rising like a heartbeat. Each note told her story of pain, of loss, of kindness, and of rediscovery. It was raw, real, and filled with soul. Halfway through the piece, something extraordinary happened. A man from the audience stood up suddenly, his face pale with disbelief. He whispered something to the person beside him, then pointed at her. Within seconds, murmurs spread across the hall. People started pulling out old photographs and programs. Some of them gasped, "It's her!" Someone cried, "That's Alina, the pianist who disappeared." Lena froze, her hands pausing above the keys. The name echoed through the hall like a ghost from another lifetime. The CEO stood at the edge of the stage, his eyes wide with shock. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. She took a deep breath and then smiled faintly. "Yes," she said softly into the microphone. "I am her." The hall went silent again. She continued, her voice calm and steady. "I was in an accident years ago. They said I didn't survive, but I did. I woke up in a life I didn't understand, among people who didn't know who I was. I thought my music was gone forever, but it found me again, in the most unexpected place, in the kindest heart." Her eyes turned toward the CEO, who still stood frozen near the stage. "Music gave me back my life," she said, "and some people gave me back my courage." She turned back to the piano and finished the piece. When the last note faded, the audience rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, but this time it didn't feel like noise. It felt like home. After the show, the press surrounded her, flooding her with questions. She answered a few politely, then slipped away to a quiet hallway behind the stage. She needed air. Moments later, the CEO found her there. He looked at her, a mixture of disbelief and wonder in his eyes. "So it's true," he said softly. "You were her all along." She nodded. "I didn't mean to hide it, I just Didn't remember at first, and when I did, I was afraid it would change everything. He stepped closer. It changes nothing. If anything, it explains why I felt like I'd known you forever. She looked down, her eyes shining. I'm sorry for not telling you sooner. He smiled gently. You gave me music again. You gave me something real. How could I ever be angry? For a moment, they stood there in silence, both smiling through tears. When they returned to the main hall, the audience was still waiting. The director of the event walked up to her and said, We'd like to honor you with a Lifetime Achievement Award for your contribution to music and for your courage to return. Lena was speechless. She accepted the trophy with trembling hands, tears slipping down her cheeks as the crowd clapped again. Later that night, back at the mansion, the celebration continued. The staff had decorated the hall with candles and flowers. Everyone was smiling, even the CEO's sister, who approached Lena quietly. I misjudged you, she said softly. I thought you were just trying to take advantage. I was wrong, Lena smiled kindly. It's never too late to see people differently. The sister nodded. You've changed all of us. Thank you. As the night grew quieter, Lena and the CEO stood by the balcony, looking out at the city lights. You did it, he said. You found your way back. She shook her head gently. No, you helped me find it. He smiled, his eyes warm. Then maybe fate wanted us to meet. Maybe, she said. But I think it wasn't just fate. It was the music. It always finds a way to bring people together. They stood there in silence for a while, the breeze softly carrying the sound of laughter and piano notes drifting from the room behind them. Lena looked at the stars and whispered, I thought I lost everything once, but maybe I just needed to lose myself to find who I really was. He looked at her, his voice quiet. And who are you now? She smiled. Someone who finally knows that music isn't about fame or applause. It's about connection, about being understood. He nodded slowly. And you've made me understand more than I ever thought I could. Their eyes met, and there was nothing left to say. The world had already said enough. As dawn began to break, Lena sat by the piano one last time that night. She played softly, her fingers light as feathers, her heart full. Each note was a promise, not of perfection, but of peace. When the sun rose, the light fell across her hands, turning them golden. For the first time, she smiled not as a legend or a lost soul, but simply as herself. A woman who had been given a second chance to live, to love, and to play. And this time she played not to be remembered, but because she was finally free.